Good morning, Mr. Professor Maravegias.
Good morning, good morning.
Good
Good morning, Vittorio.
everybody.
Good morning, Chris. Nikos.
Hello, good morning.
Stavros. Eduardo.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, Christoforos.
Good morning, Yiannis.
Morning.
Christoforos.
Good morning.
Καλημέρα. Και όλους και όλες.
We wait for Barberis and Sakellaropoulos.
Barbas is online.
Tassos is online. Yes, Tassos is online.
We're waiting only for the Professor Sakellaropoulos. Stavros, your microphone is muted.
Right. So, as I said previously, Mr. Sakellaropoulos is going to a little bit delayed. So we should start. I believe we could start now, and he is going to join us in the proceedings. So, hello to all. I am Stavros Pantazopoulos. I believe we have spoken each other with everyone. This is the first LTTA of the project Continugee. I'm very happy to have you here all. The project is confunded, I must say that, by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union. So I will present the people that are going to speak today, that are going to have the presentations, and I will give the floor to Professor Eduardo Barberis, who is the host of the LTTA. So today we have together, as I said, Professor Eduardo Barberis from Urbino, Carlo, University of Urbino, Carlo. Hello, Mr. Barberis.
Hello.
Hello. We have Professor Napoleon Maravegias from National Kapodistrian University of Athens, who is the scientific coordinator of the project.
Good morning.
Good morning. Emeritus Professor Theodoros Sakellaropoulos from EPEXA, which is a scientific center based in Athens, Greece, and he's not with us now. Anastasios Barbas, he's the representative of the National Agency for the Erasmus Plus program from IKI. And I was informed that he must attend another session, so he must have a brief greeting and he must go. So afterwards, he's gonna take the floor. We also have Assistant Professor Nikos Kourachanis representing EPEXA. Hello, Nikos.
Good morning again.
Again. From Urbino, Carlo, we said Eduardo Barberis, and we would have from Fachhochschule Kiel Professor Vasilis Tsianos, but due to an unexpected event, he cannot be with us today, so he's replaced by his scientific collaborator, Christos, and he is also a Continugee researcher. Hello, Christos.
Good morning, Christos.
Good morning, everyone.
So, if Mr. Barbas is ready, he can have.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving me this priority. As I said to Mr. Pantazopoulos when we were discussing this invitation to address a few words in this first kickoff LTTA meeting, I said to him that I participate in working groups for the Erasmus Plus program, and we have meetings every day because we are writing the new guides for the program. So, but on the other hand, I believe and I felt that I wanted so much to say a few words in this project. First of all, because if I may say, I feel very honored and very lucky to be given the opportunity to meet in person Professor Maravegias and have the opportunity to collaborate with him and with his excellent team of professors and researchers. And on the second hand, I myself, I am an educator. I have been teaching in Greece for 16 years. And now I work for the National Agency for the Erasmus Plus program. But I think education is the ultimate gift for everyone. And now taking into account that these specific projects, the focus of this specific project is on the one hand the immigrant, which is a critical issue the last years, and so many perspectives on this issue. And on the other hand, the aim of this project is to deliver the necessary education to these students, these immigrant students. So I consider this project of great importance. I'm very happy that this project was able to pass all the thresholds and be evaluated with higher score and be funded by the European Union and have the opportunity to produce results and help the students get the appropriate education and be able to live in another country respecting the values and their history and their language, and at the same time understanding and respecting and being able to live in another framework, the European framework, which is so much necessary. So as I said, I am very happy also that I have the opportunity to be the manager of this project. I am waiting to see the results. I know that the results are going to be of high quality and very useful for the education and for the education of the immigrant students. And I'm sure that the whole team is a great team of professors and researchers. I am a top fan of Professor Maravegias, as so many other people in Greece. And I want to wish you, all of you, the best of luck and to reassure you that on behalf of the National Agency, the project is going to have every support is going to need along the way. So that's all by me.
Thank you, Mr. Barbas.
And thank you for the invitation.
We thank you for your kind words, and I'm sure that we will have the opportunity to meet during the forthcoming LTTAs and conferences and talk in person. Thank you very much for being here today with us. So I will give the floor now to Mr. Barberis, to Eduardo Barberis, in order to proceed along with the invitation of the LTTA. Mr. Barberis, you have the speech.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. I would not introduce the project per se to the audience because I suppose that Napoleon will do it later. I will just focus on what's our task today. This is the first brick in the big wall of the project that we are going to build up, possibly. And it's reconstruction of the state of the art. So basically, we are assessing what's the starting point in our national context in reference to including refugee youth in educational paths. And so we expect from our partners just to have a first introduction to this issue and just to problematize what are the open issues that we will have to cope in the following steps of the project. So I just as a co-chair together with Stavros of this session, I will just ask to stick to the timetable. I know that we have a very few minutes to present such a complex issue, just a quarter per person. but we may recover something in the discussion later on. So it's just short presentation on main issues and concerns, and then we can discuss for a future direction and where to go for the next phases of the project. Thank you all.
So I believe now it's Mr. Maravegias' turn.
Okay.
To have a brief greeting.
I welcome Professor Sakellaropoulos, who lead this meeting now, and you are welcome all in this meeting. Is the first meeting in our project to promote this project in the way of the education of the children of the refugees. We try hard, but our university has a lot of bureaucratic difficulties, as you know all, I think. This difficulty to proceed forward of this project. This is a very big problem, and for this reason, the German partner is not yet paid even with the first installment. But I can assure you that I have not touched any payment till now, after 10 months of the beginning of the project. This is I think that the big problem. For this reason, we ask to have more time to complete this project. I thank Mr. Barberis, that is the representative of the Greek agency to have the opportunity to help us in all this project, because this project is very difficult, not for the scientific point, but from the bureaucratic point. This is our problem. And I think that Professor Roussakis and Professor Pantazopoulos can explain in detail all this procedure of our project. And I think that Professor Sakellaropoulos can explain the difficulties from this side. I think that all you are responsible for your work. I am glad to meet you, and thank you for this meeting.
Thank you, Professor. I believe that every institution nowadays during the COVID-19 era is facing bureaucratic problems. So this is a common problem, I suppose, for every university or project like that. That I can assure you. I have spoken with others, so that's what I'm saying. And proceeding with the invitation, I must give the floor to Professor Sakellaropoulos, Stavros Sakellaropoulos, who is with us today and now. He's in. Professor.
Thank you, Dr. Pantazopoulos.
I thank you.
So, a warming hello to all our dear colleagues. As Stavros said, I'm Emeritus Professor Theodoros Sakellaropoulos. And I represent in this project the Scientific Society for Social Cohesion and Development, that is said to EPEXA. EPEXA is an organization, a non-profit organization. We published and edited the scientific magazine Social Cohesion and Development since 15 years, since 2006, and we are very proud for this publication. EPEXA is a politically independent center of scientific research. Our purpose is to promote the principles of social justice, solidarity, and equality through the scientific research and implementing programs and promoting also the public debate. EPEXA supports the promotion of social economy and social entrepreneurship, as well as strengthening of local social development, the integration and activation of vulnerable groups in social and economic development in fight against social exclusion. The results extracted from the scientific researchers are published in our magazine, in our journal, and I call you to support this journal with your contribution the next time. I need to say that I'm truly delighted that we participate in this project with the universities, with Napoleon Maravegias, with Roussakis, and all the representatives of the University of Athens, as well as from the University of Papaioannou University, where I was belong before I was pensioned. There are two reasons because I'm very happy for this project. The first one is because EPEXA goals and objectives coincide with those of the specific research of the project. And the second reason is because we collaborate with scientists, researchers, and professors from all these acknowledged institutions in Europe, in Athens and in Europe. We have our team. Our team consists from Mr. Kourachanis, from Mr. Pantazopoulos, from Mr. Skamnakis, the assistant professor, Mr. Papaioannou. Is a very, I think it's a very, very excellent team specialized on this issue. And I am waiting the best results of them, from them. I hope, at the end, I hope that the implementation of this program will help refugee children and adults get provided with education that introduces them to the European values. This is the goal, the end goal of our program. And to bring them some elements of the European way of life and our basic principles. I hope and I wish much success to our project and to all of you in this collaboration. I'm happy to collaborate with you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sakellaropoulos. It's a great honor for us too. And we shall start now. We should proceed with the first presentation from Assistant Professor from NCUA, Yiannis Roussakis. Mr. Roussakis, thank you for being here today with us. You have the floor.
Thank you, Stavros. I'm trying to share my screen, and I think it's disabled, so probably you should.
I must give the rights.
But before sharing,
yes,
I would also like to welcome you on behalf of our team at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, and say I'm really happy to see you all here. We have very few opportunities to meet as a team during this pandemic, so it's really important that we make the best of it and the most of it during our meetings. So it's still disabled, Stavros. I'm sure it can be fixed.
I gave you the rights to be the host now.
Yeah, you did.
So you
did.
Stavros, I would like to request the same to me.
Yes. I'm gonna give the permission to all of the presenters.
So this is the, I'm sorry. I have to stop share and redo that because I would have to, okay, now that's going to be okay. I'll try to remove the black screens you have. Okay, so in this LTTA, we have to discuss the first two intellectual outputs of our project, but actually, due to the pandemic and to the difficulties of doing empirical research on the field with refugee children at school, in Greece, we are facing the situation that due to the pandemic, most of the refugee children are confined into the camps. They don't really attend schools. Schools were closed for almost 6 months during the 2020-2021 school year. So all the children that had the technical means attended their classrooms remotely, but many of the children of the camps did not attend school at all. So that was a problem that had to be addressed, and actually posed certain difficulties for doing a needs analysis research concerning these children. So we're going to focus on the first intellectual output of the project, the state of the art, which is mapping, studying, and reviewing the literature towards the integration, the educational integration of refugee children on the one hand, and the establishment of conditions for continuity in their education on the other hand, which is the main scope of our project. Not only to study the educational integration of these children and adolescents, but also to see how we could ensure continuity when they are moving inside the European Union due to their living conditions, due to the asylum conditions and things like that. So the University of Athens first tried to draft a guided methodology for the state-of-the-art review, and we decided that it would be best to do a desk research, which is a systematic review strategy that would allow us to review literature and review also gray literature, what is national reports, statistics from the ministries and from international agencies, and so gain a really thorough aspect of the state of the art, the existing discourse, the existing policies, the existing institutional provisions towards the education of refugee children. Our main research question, as we have derived it right from the start of this program, from drafting this program, which I did with Professor Kourachanis last year. The main question for the systematic review is, what are the current policies and practices used in refugee children education in the European Union, aiming at offering an education which will introduce refugee children to the European way of life, European values in schooling, and ensuring inclusion and continuity of their education as they move from countries of initial reception to countries of final settlement. So at our desk research, we used for keywords like education, school, refugee children, European values, inclusion, continuity, reception, settlement, the role of the teachers and things like that. I'm not going into further detail on the guidelines, but I will go on to show you what we as coordinators also undertook was a drafting of the international framework. That is the European Union policies and the policies from other international organizations dealing with the education of refugee children, but also some examples, some good practices probably from European and non-European countries dealing with refugee education. So theoretically, our framework of discussion actually we thought that it should contain three elements. On the one hand, we as universities, we as educational institutions are so much into the knowledge production business. So our research aims at establishing the knowledge paradigms that would facilitate the education of refugee children. But on the other hand, we had to do our field research. We have to utilize the knowledge we can produce from the field research in order to structure a dialogue which could result to the benefit of our targeted audience, which is the refugee children. And also dealing with the literature, we have seen that the state of the art now is represented by holistic models for the educational integration of these children. And I'm showing you one such holistic model that was taken from an OECD publication. The feature of this holistic model is that it combines school and schooling needs with social, individual, personal needs and factors. So for us, it is we see that in order to ensure continuity in the education of refugee children, we must also ensure the continuity of their social inclusion, of their social integration, of the well-being of their families, and that will contribute to their educational integration as well. So we were trying to set up or to investigate the factors that would ensure that kind of a holistic approach to refugee children education. Now, at the European level, I've chosen a couple of slides just for reviewing the European policies on the issue. On the European level, the main instrument is the action plan on the integration of the country nationals. And at that plan, there's specific mention of education, including actions to promote language training, participation of migrant children to childhood education, and share teacher training and civic education. That is actually the main focus of this project. Education is also mentioned in relation to employment and vocational training, but also to participation to the cultural life and social inclusion. And this action plan, which is renewed and it is also complemented by newer decisions by the Commission, places a strong focus on social inclusion and promoting young people's integration in democratic life, which is also one of the issues that we are going to investigate in this project. The integration of refugee children in the European way of life and the European values. And I believe this is also the spirit in the parliamentary resolution of 2016, commenting on the situation on the Mediterranean and the need for a holistic EU approach to migration, which also states that literacy and language courses, intercultural dialogue, education and professional training are effective means to facilitate the integration of refugee children to the European Union, keeping in mind that integration is a two-way process and that respect for the values upon which the Union is built must be an integral part of the integration process. So these are the guidelines for our research as well. Now, for education, we have seen, we understand that in most cases, language competencies, educational competency which is not given for children of school age in refugee populations, and vocational training are considered cornerstones to integration practice. And improving the educational levels and the language skills levels of these children would help them to integrate in the host societies. So most of the survey research, the empirical research we have reviewed, recognize the importance of acquiring language skills for refugee children, of establishing conditions of equal access to all levels of education, and for providing them with the facilities that would address their difficulties, which sometimes are parallel to the learning needs of children with special learning needs and disabilities, I must say. And this is one thing. This is a good thing to recognize that we have a special population, but on the other hand, it sometimes can be puzzling and impeding as it is confined to addressing learning needs, while other kinds of needs are also important, as we've seen in the holistic model. So in our review, we have extensively referred on the educational approaches of the European Union and other international organizations on the education of refugee children. And we have seen that there are extreme variations in the way that these children are received and treated and advance in the educational system. Sometimes, as we can see from this table over here, you see that it's very simplistic. Some models or some categorizations are actually simplistic. They do not really represent what is happening on the ground. And that makes our research and our next intellectual outputs, which deal with the needs assessment and the good practices, really important to clarify, to focus on what is happening at the European level concerning the education of these children. So we see that in some places there are reception classes, in some places there are not reception classes. In some places, some countries appear in 2 or 3 or 4 places, like Greece. Greece appears on the column that talks about reception classes, and then it also appears on the column that it states that there are no reception classes from the 1780s. So what is actually happening in different countries? What is actually the policy? And this is also true for other dimensions of educational provision, for example, tracking. In Greece, we do not actually have ability tracking. So appearing on this table is also could also be confusing. And that's why I'm showing you this table, because having the experience of Greece, I know that sometimes data appearing in European and international level are not actually representative of the real situation, but are based on legal documents or guidelines that may or may not be implemented in a real situation. What we have seen in Greece is that actually there is a national plan that is built along the lines of the action plan of the integration of the country nationals, but there are really many problems concerning its implementation and concerning the way that is put in practice on the ground. I'm not going to go into further. I think I've almost finished my time. But what is interesting, I would like to come up with a final interesting thing. What we've seen is that systems that actually employ a holistic approach and have a working situation with the education of refugee children use several means for accomplishing that are actually worthy of studying or seen in more depth during the next intellectual outputs. One of these issues is the existence of intercultural mediators, which actually know the workings of the systems. They can guide the families of these children, and they can direct them through the different paths that are available, so they would make the best of the educational situation, while on the other hand catering for their psychological and social needs. So finalizing this report from the part of the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, we also come up with some proposals that have been derived from the literature review and can be further examined during the next intellectual output workings. The second intellectual output is the needs analysis and assessment, which, as I told you, it has not progressed as we would like it to progress, but we are in a really good path, and we are now in the process of interviewing teachers that actually work with refugee children and see what they deem as their own needs and their children's needs, and how what they propose for dealing with these needs. And that intellectual output is going to come through ethnographic and empirical research as well. And I think that in our next meeting, probably in September, when we are going to have also a multiplier event, we would be in a position to say many more things about this situation. So thank you for your attention, and I'm sorry if I've taken more time than it was allocated. I hope that everything is going well, and see you in person really soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roussakis, for this thorough presentation regarding the framework of the educational integration of refugee children. You shed light to the European policies regarding this serious issue and matter. So I'm going to proceed. It seems that I have lost the host rights, though I regained them, and I'm going to pass them to Mr. Kourachanis now. Just a minute. So, Nikos, I believe you have the rights now. Nikos, you have the microphone closed. It's muted.
Okay. Do you hear me now?
Yes, of course, yes.
Just take me a moment to share my screen. Okay.
Your desktop is full, as far as I can see.
Unfortunately. Well, I suppose that you're seeing the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay. Hello to everyone again. I would like again to thank you for the participation to this interesting discussion, especially Professor Maravegias and Professor Sakellaropoulos. Yiannis made a very fruitful presentation for the whole of this working package, so I will try to avoid some overlapping. And mainly I will try to contribute on this, analyzing some aspects of educational policies for refugee children, which are implemented by the Greek state, and especially in the last 5 years. This analysis will be based in the state-of-the-art review in order to identify some key issues which we will try to elaborate the next work packages of our progress of our project, as already Yiannis said. The review uses a desk research which includes 2 pillars: a literature review aiming at the development of a conceptual framework to be used for describing, understanding, and analyzing policies and practices of education for the refugee children, focusing on the issue of European values and the European way of life, and on the arrangements for the continuity of educational provision. Secondly, a review of set of data and facts included in reports, like the grey literature as said previously, from state and government agencies, or also from NGOs and international organizations, statistical sets, institutional and legal text on the issues mentioned above. As we already know, and as Yiannis already mentioned, the scholarly debate for refugee children in education has been limited so far, especially in the case of Greece. Although that Greece has a 3 decades immigration experience, until now doesn't have a coherent educational system for refugee children. After the refugee crisis of 2015, the Greek educational system had limited technical facilities, and the effectiveness of the recent statutory regulation for the integration of refugee children was not tested. Greek authorities were unprepared. The main reactions on refugee education were supported by 2 major initiatives: the establishment of the reception facilities for refugee education in 2016, and the initiation of the role of coordinator of refugee education. The operation of a reception facility refugee education was complementary to the morning operation of schools, and they were found in a close range to reception centers. The efficiency of these state initiatives will be discussed and analyzed below in the main corpus of my presentation. the systematic analysis of that has been completed aimed at detecting and reporting the implemented educational policies in Greece regarding refugee education and the different teaching practices and integration procedures of refugee children into the Greek educational system. A thematic analysis was followed to categorize the results of the state-of-the-art review regarding the evaluation of relevant educational policies for refugee children formulated and implemented by the Greek state, and of course related to the emergency situation of educating thousands of refugee children without having previous experience to this field. I will try to present more in depth 4 aspects of the state-of-the-art review. According to the Hellenic Observatory on Intercultural Education, an approach we will adopt to this national report, the problems that emerged could be thematically classified into 4 main clusters. A, operational administrative issues. B, pedagogical educational issues. C, synergies and cooperation. And the last, the issues of training. According to the first pillar, the operational and administrative issues, in Greece, according to the law 4636/2019 on international protection, every minor who has been granted the status of international protection is obliged to engage with the structures of primary and secondary compulsory education of the public educational system, with the conditions that apply to Greek citizens. Practical problems regarding the registration of students in school made more difficult the whole process. According to the second pillar, pedagogical and educational issues, the scholarly literature review found a significant problem related to school dropout rates for refugee children. According to Roussakis, only 45% of children aged 6 to 17 attend formal education. It is found in the literature that the children of refugees and migrants in Greece are exhibited to various hazards, and it is estimated by UNICEF that they have lost an average of 2 years and 6 months of schooling due to conflict episodes, violence, and displacement even before their relocation. Also, regarding the factors that affect the participation of refugee students to the school program and the dropout rates, 2 main factors are identified. Those related to the refugees themselves, how they perceive education at the reception facility for refugee education, and their expectations from the procedure that and the factors related to the operation of these structures. Another factor that is linked to the dropout phenomenon of a child refugee is related directly to the way of operation of a refugee school and the 2 initiatives of the Ministry of Education that were noted above. Regarding synergies and cooperation between different stakeholders for refugee education in Greece, it is to note that compulsory education, compulsory attendance to Greek school ends at the age of 15. This means that refugees need to have a net of further preparation time before entering the labor market. This net should be created by vocational and lifelong skills training so as they can to be competitive in the Greek labor market. However, the literature found significant lack of coordination between NGOs and the public services who were responsible for enrolling the children at schools. And regarding to the last pillar, training issues, several lack of training issues and expertise regarding the teaching personnel of refugee children are identified. The reception facilities for refugee education were staffed by teachers of primary and secondary education who were not permanent but substitute teachers. This created a number of problems like that, such as the teachers who were initially hired as part-time educators applied for full-time positions, and this led to subsequent changes in the number of teachers in the refugee facilities in the reception facilities for refugee education. Another severe obstacle was that there is a limited working experience of teachers regarding both intercultural education and the efficiency when working with a multicultural class. Teachers were unprepared and did not have the right trainings and skills to teach these children and this population. And the last severe problem mentioned by the integrated report was that educators were only trained to teach Greek as a mother tongue and not as a foreign language. I think that these are the main issues that identified by the state-of-the-art review. And just to make a sum up, there are many issues that emerged from the state-of-the-art review from the Greek case. There were identified several gaps and weaknesses, such as the lack of access to the educational services based on the location or region of a refugee children and his family, limited to non-existent access to tertiary education, the few funded programs of the state for the vocational training for refugee children and minors, lack of established professional interpretation services with the responsibility of the state, and of course, unprepared and underqualified teachers. So, fewer problems would exist in schools if, first of all, experienced teachers with knowledge of teaching the native language as a foreign language existed. A feeling of community is created in reception facilities for refugee education among teachers and children, and there is a cooperation between refugee school and morning schools. This feeling has not yet been developed enough, as teachers, stakeholders, students, and principals of two different schools operate mostly in separate way without much cooperation. And finally, a sense of team and togetherness is created among students. This is important so as children can acquire a feeling of normality in their lives, putting away the psychological pressure of being a refugee. These are some main thoughts from me and from the Greek National Report. I would like to thank you, and I think that we could continue in the discussion to some specific issues of these aspects. Stavros?
Now you can hear me, I believe. I was muted once again. I said that I thank you very much, Nikos, for your insightful presentation regarding the aspects of education and policies for refugee children from the point of view of the Greek reality. I believe that we're going to have now Mr. Eduardo Barberis, who is going to present the Italian aspect, the Italian point of view of this matter. And I'm reclaiming the host rights and giving them to Eduardo. So Eduardo, you can do now your presentation.
Okay. Okay, I suppose you see full screen now. Isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. So I will give a short as possible presentation on three issues, a short introduction on legal framework, some data just to problematize what we define as refugee children. So who are we talking about? And then some issue on concerning education and refugee children. As for the legal framework, formally Italy is quite an inclusive legal framework. If you check in most of comparative assessment, I don't know, MIPEX or Euridice, usually formally Italy is considered quite open to including non-Italian citizens in education. We have a quite new law, the so-called Zampa law. Zampa is the parliament member that supported the law, which is considered by UNHCR as one of the most advanced law for unaccompanied minors, with clearly state the right to education, to legal support, for minor to be heard and to take part into legal decisions, set up a new guardianship system to ensure that children are followed up enough by a responsible adult. And besides unaccompanied minors, since 1998, and then with the following decrees in 1999, it's clearly stated that migrant children have the right to education. This applies also to undocumented children, which is not so common in all the countries. And it's an extended right to education that applies also after coming of age. So if you start educational path when you are minor, but the educational path ends up after you turn 18, well, you have the right to continue your education till complying, having the certificate. In practice, things are a bit more complex, and if we focus on refugee children, the main problem is probably that we have a parallel and residual reception system, which is separate from, or mostly separate from, the rest of the welfare, including in the welfare also the education system. We have different categories of persons that we can include in our target. One of the most focused on in the Italian law is the category of unaccompanied minors. They are some more than 5,000 now. This is not the highest number, 5,000 in the reception system, and almost 8,000 in Italy, not the highest number ever. We had years in which they were more than 10,000, but there's a recent new growth. And a share of them is over 18. They are called unaccompanied minors, but they are over 18 because they are in the system of the so-called administrative continuation. That is, it's possible at first for 6 months, for a maximum of 3 years, to stay into the system, to complete the program, and to support then an autonomous persecution of their life. We have two problems here. First, the share of recipients that run away from the system, that it's around 3–5%. We have monthly assessments, and every month there's 3–5% of persons missing. And some 30% of them are located just in one region, in Sicily, which is the external frontier, where arrival by boat are most common. This is the list of countries. All this data comes from the Italian report on the reception system. So names of the countries are in Italian, but I think they are quite easy to grasp anyway. And we have another point here. Just a small minority of unaccompanied minors applied for asylum. So are they refugee children? In what sense? And what is more, some 60% of their application are usually rejected. So they are not fully refugees, and they are in a in-between situation. in which they can stay in Italy because they are minors, but they are not considered refugees. And this is a big issue when they turn 18, because the chances of continuing to stay in Italy or elsewhere in Europe is quite jeopardized and very complex. In the hierarchy of the countries, you can see there's quite a share of Albanians, and they are not the only one. Also, this applies to Egyptians. But in the professional debate, especially in social work more than in education, there's a debate on the infringement of the system. Basically, Albanian minors are usually considered not as minor fleeing from a danger, but as a family strategy. To use the minor as a head to enter, to have then a family entering legally the country. So this also may be an issue in the treatment they may have in the system, because basically they are considered as undeserving recipients. How minors are inserted into education? We have an wait, I miss, I think. Okay, I forgot a figure, but okay, unaccompanied minors are just 1/3 of minors into the reception system, because there are accompanied minors, that is, minors that are together with their parents and relatives into the reception system. Partly are refugee and partly are just asylum seekers, applicants. And there's quite a number of new school admission every year. For this category. And we may see that some are not inserted very fast into the school track. For example, as unaccompanied minors, there are almost 3,000 new entries into the system, but just 2,000 entered into school. So there's a sort of lag. And this lag usually implies that the minors are educated within the reception system, so outside the school system. As the first presentation showed, there's the option to enter the regular schooling, but then there's also a kind of separate education that usually is focused only on learning Italian. So as you can see in the last line, more than 90% of reception facilities organize classes to learn Italian. They should be 100%, and sometimes the language classes are very short, last just a few hours, but that's one point. For the minors that are included in the reception system, there are individual educational projects that are made, supervised by social worker into the reception system. I call them social workers, but there are different kinds of social workers. Some are strictly educators, and mostly are educators, and with agreement with local school for participation. Since most of them are coming of age, as you can see from the graph of age here, there's an issue in including them in schools. So there's the idea of having them to acquire the certificate for compulsory education, but then most of them are inserted then in professional courses and training courses and traineeships. Most often in the catering and tourist services sector, more than half of them. So we wonder if there's any sort of attention on what the youth want to do or just if there's the reception system look for easier opportunity, and in the tourist industry, opportunity seems to be easier, and which may lead toward a sort of downward assimilation because the sector is not one with a high income. So the official assessment report on training and traineeship projects maintain that traineeship usually are too short, trainees are not proficient enough in Italian, and the traineeship experience is not formally acknowledged, and this may be an issue also for further educational credentials. And projects are not equally available in the country, usually are more common in regions with low employability, which may not be very helpful for further and future integration. So let's see some issue referred to strictly education for refugee minors. First, we have a problem with paths. So where refugee minors are enrolled. As I mentioned before, age is an issue. Most often, they are included in adult education. So they do not stay with their peers, but they are included in adult education classes and or in vocational training paths, with a risk of a segmented or parallel educational welfare in which you have classes just with refugee minors or refugee minors and adult migrants without enough contact with the rest of the society. There's an issue about formal and non-formal education. So we have to debate about so-called credentialism. So how important is that they acquire formal education, which seems not to be the case, as I mentioned before, for some of the traineeships they are involved in. How much are we able to recognize non-formal educational paths that these youth had? And we have also to balance social inclusion goals, that is having education as a way to keep in touch with the local society, and economic competitiveness goals. That is the idea that you have to provide skill and expertise that then are useful for a positive economic success afterwards. And this, I don't know if there's a trade-off, but it's for sure an open issue. And from an educational point of view, we can see some classic problems in discriminatory education. One is the cooling down of expectation, probably. That is, if youth is so much inserted in specific professional path, it means that their expectation to do something else probably is curbed out. And then this probably means that we have also minors trapped in undesired educational and migration paths. So since they are mostly adult or close to adulthood, sometimes they feel trapped into the system, and this is why we have also this high number of people fleeing from the system, because they feel trapped in there. Another point is how the educational institutions are prepared to welcome refugee minors. We have a general problem in assessing the skills and the of non-Italian speaking pupils. This is a general issue, not only referred to refugee children, but whatever your skills are if you are not proficient in Italian, you are considered unskilled in the Italian system. And you may be treated as such, and for example, not inserted in a class adequate for your age and skill level. And we have still a strong problem of decolonizing education. There's a strong racialization of minority. In the refugee welcome system, a sort infantilization and adultization of the minors. Infantilization because they are in reception systems that cater for all they need, and adultization in society because usually migrant youth is considered to be more adult than national youth. And then we have in the special education literature that is quite widespread in Italy, we have a number of persons focusing on, or scholars focusing on the difficulty to welcome in school specific profiles, people with psychological disorders, post-traumatic stress condition, which are very common. Disabled minors, which are quite common in refugee families, or those in custodial structures in juvenile justice, which may be an outcome from some unaccompanied minors, that is the drop into the deviance situation. And to sum up, we can see the risk of different forms of discrimination and of reproduction of inequality. Spatial discrimination. The reception facilities usually are not so close to educational facilities, and this may be a hurdle to educational participation. Peer discrimination, because in the general anti-immigrant sentiment and fueled by the media, we can have a stigmatization of youth minorities. Discrimination in school paths, in which we have this overrepresentation in vocational paths. Discrimination in transitions with failures, dropouts, delayed paths in which migrant and refugee minors usually are, or too often are not inserted in a class correct for their age. And in general, to sum up, we may point out that there may be a discrimination in the quality of education. That is in the skills and investment that the school, the educational system put in dealing with minority pupils. So just to turn around the point raised by our project, that is to include refugee children into European values, I wonder if the school system itself do follow the European values in welcoming children, migrant children, and refugee children. Okay, that's all from my part.
Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you, Mr. Barberis, for your presentation on the aspects of the educational policies for refugee children in Italy from your point of view. And I think it was very important due to the fact that you insisted on the minors' reality and their integration with the educational system, which is very important. And I believe that we should proceed to Mr. Zissis from Fachhochschule Kiel. I believe that I should give the host rights again.
Okay, hello Stavros, I hope you can all hear me.
Yes, of course.
Okay, cool. And let me know if there's any, again, sound or technical problem and during the talk, or if I'm going too fast. It's always a mix of stress and enthusiasm, so, you know.
I believe that you are an enthusiast.
Thank you, first of all, for this is immaculate presentations and the opening speech and the presentations, also regarding the Greek context and the Italian context. So I will try to give you, I'll just share with you the PowerPoint now.
I've given you the rights, so you can share your screen now.
I have actually, like one more main PowerPoint, which I will share with you. And then the first part, because I have inserted the historical sort of introduction on, migration and refugees in Germany, because I think it's important. So I will begin with that first, but let me show you the presentation first. I hope it is a little, you can all see that.
Yes.
And
nice.
So greetings again. So from the part of the Fachhochschule, the University of Applied Sciences Kiel, German professor Giorgos. So my name is Christos. I'm a coordinator assistant in this program and writing also my PhD with the collaboration of the University of Hamburg in social and cultural anthropology and the Fachhochschule Kiel. This is the structure of the presentation. I thought it is relevant, especially in this context, to begin with the historical background of, Germany, as they say in German, Deutschland as Einwanderungsland, like Germany, a society of immigration, which has been acknowledged the last years, although we have already in Germany lived experience of migration more than, half of a century, especially after the Second World War influx of migration. Then I will go with an overview of educational policies and pedagogical and teaching practices and approaches for the integration of children and adolescents with refugee status in Germany. I will try to narrow it down with some paradigms and concepts. So let me start. I will share the screen now. Just give me a couple of seconds because there were some statistics and things that I wanted to show you with Germany as an immigration land. So I will share that with you in a second. Hope so. Yeah, I think you can all see that, right? The
yes.
History of, so migration in the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, Germany was still a country of emigration. And since the mid-50s, it has been one of the most important European destination countries for migrants. The most relevant forms of immigration to Germany are the recruitment of guest workers, a Gastarbeiter, as in other places in Europe, the influx of late Aussiedler, or as we call ethnic German immigrants, and then the admission of asylum seekers, which, of course, after the so-called refugee crisis has been exploded in the last years, especially in Germany. There are some perhaps details regarding the history of guest workers, but again, I think it's relevant because it has to do a lot with the genealogy, a short genealogy of, civic education, or what are the rights and duties of foreigners, of Ausländer in Germany. And that started more or less with the recruited workers in Germany. So although there were a lot of agreements from 1955 with Italy, Greece, of course, it's the topic also of my dissertation, Turkey, Yugoslavia, permanent residence of the recruited workers back then was not initially planned regarding the migration policy of Germany. Rather, they were to return to their home countries after a limited stay. So, however, those with political responsibility sense that migration was taking place. Here is a photograph from registration and medical examination center at the German Recruitment Commission in Istanbul. You can also see or have relevant pictures with Greece and Italy as main countries which sort of, let's say, gave migration and working force to build, so to say, the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle of Germany. Since 1973, the resident status of guest workers has been solidified in the course of family reunification, and the rights of foreign workers were consolidated by several decisions of the Federal Constitution Court in the 70s and 80s, so that their residents no longer depended on the situation on the labor market due to their legal status. So just to give you a review of important laws which have influenced, the migration topic, and of course the educational policies. Although Germany has overslept on the topics of integration with huge words from former federal president of Germany, Horst Köhler, intensive efforts to regulate migration can be noted since 2005. So, for example, the Integration Summit since 2006, the National Integration Plan 2007, the German Islam Conference 2009, the integration courses, the reforms of the Citizenship Act 2000, Immigration Act 2000, and the Act on the Recognition of Foreign Qualifications. These were all, significant law and juridical actions which have ratified, policies, discourses, and a certain way of thinking on migration. And there have been titans, of course, in spousal reunification, in asylum law, according to the Dublin and the Asylum Seekers Benefits Act. So the immigration discourse is very susceptible to populism, also especially in the last years, and especially due to the so-called refugee crisis. So Germany, imagine, has a population of around 84 million, and with around 90.3 million people with a migration background, what they say, Migrationshintergrund, more than 1 in 5 inhabitants has a migration history of their own or that of at least one parent. In some federal states, like in Bavaria or Baden-Württemberg, this amount is also 1 to 3 or 1 out of 4. So you can imagine people with migration background. So more than half of the people with a migration background also have a German citizenship. These are some of the countries, as you can see, with migration background to 26%, and most of the countries of origin is Turkey with 2.8 million people around the whole Federal Republic. Poland, 2.2, Russia, Kazakhstan, and other countries, just for the statistic sake of it. And you can see here if you can see that on the map, these are the federal, Germany with the federal states. Kiel is more or less here, and Hamburg is here. So you can see here the average of people with a migration background, according to the latest statistics of the Deutsches Bundesamt in 2019. So at an average of 35.6 years, people with an immigrant background significantly younger than people without an immigrant background. So among children and young people, a particularly large number have an immigrant background of more or less 39.6%. And here again, there are some of the countries of origin. You can see with Romanian migrants, but also from Syria, which has been augmented since the last year due to the so-called refugee crisis, the main countries of origin. You can see also Bulgaria, Turkey, then Croatia and Kosovo, already with a lot of Balkan countries. There are a lot of asylum seekers back then, from the 80s, but also from the war in Yugoslavia. So you can imagine the influx and the generations of people coming into Germany. And regarding to asylum, a total of 142,509 asylum applications were submitted in 2019. Around 38% of the applicants were granted protection status, meaning they were allowed to stay in Germany for a limited period. And these are, you can see, asylum, family, work, and education, Ausbildung are the main reasons for migrating or also asking for asylum. So these are really new data. I'm just turning on the screen now to the educational concept, and Stavros let me know again on the 15 minutes, because I think will cut down a bit of the material. So, okay, I think we have a. There's a problem with the foliant. Okay, the educational concept. So, so in Germany, it all started from the 70s with the influx of migrants and guest workers. So at that time, the official policy, which was very non-permanent for migration and gastarbeiters, the educational policy was called Ausländerpädagogik, so pedagogy for foreigners. And this, of course, developed in many in the years to what we all know as intercultural education, and especially since the mid 80s and then early 90s, after a huge, discourse also on, integration in Germany. And of course, intercultural competence and communication, some of the aspects that also Yiannis Roussakis mentioned for Greece, but also Professor Barberis for Italy. The intercultural, I just let the German wording here, the intercultural opening and intercultural competence of institutions as part of professionality, and we can think about what does that mean for educational structures. And then some later developments which I wanted to share with you, the so-called anti-bias approach. So this is a later development, and we were working in Germany the last years with that in schools or other educational structures. What we say in German, the Vorurteilsbewusste Pädagogik. So the last year has been more on, anti-discrimination education, so combating notions of, structural and institutional racism, and some of the issues that Professor Barberis mentioned at the very end. So again, we have the, diversity intercultural competence. Georg Auenheimer, for example, is one of the major German reform educators, let's say, who tried to introduce these notions of intercultural competences, intercultural education, dialogue, and so on, and communication. But the latest years, the discourse has been, there's been a shift of paradigm, and now we are talking not only about the cultural education, but about migrationspädagogik. And allow me to say that, Professor Yiannis, who is my supervisor and coordinator of the program, is one of the, I would say, key figures. I hope you won't see that as an appraisal, but it really is one of the key figures, along with other German of migration background, social researchers who have introduced this topic, so that or act only on intercultural education, but on migration pedagogic, or as Paul Mecherel has put it, on racismus kritische Pädagogik, like a critical racism education, and other forms which are related with what I told you on anti-bias education, or education as empowerment, also from Afro-German educators, which has been also the latest development the last years. Of course, intersectionality, and I think this will be also a huge asset also to our work here in this project. And so all these, developments and concepts and discourses leading to an anti-racist education. So not only talking about the racismus kritische, racism critical education, but then a full anti-racist education. I will skip this part with intercultural competence. I think you all are aware of that, or also of the typical principles. This is the work, so more or less, that has been done, in Germany, also with migration, but slowly also with, adolescents of refugee status, to try to cultivate the issues of, respect, conflict, capability to ability to combat conflict. Unvoreingenommenheit means impartiality and openness and empathy. And as one of the critical migration researchers here on the mindset strategy has said, empathy is not to be sold on the app store. So this is a holistic, as Professor Roussakis said, a holistic, and dynamic procedure, and a way that we all as a school and migration educators should work on that direction. Let me go to the huge topic of discrimination. So as I told you, the huge educational concepts which are based after this huge discourse on, discrimination, exclusion, disability, and that concerns, of course, the pupils and with refugee status and or refugee minors, is again borrowed from the American context of Sparks and Derman, Louise, on the anti-bias approach. This is an approach which has been introduced in Germany very late in the day. You can see from Petra Wagner, 2013, the anti-bias approach already with the school children of refugee status from the primary education. And of course, this huge debate, which has shaped a really huge debate the last years also in Germany on racism and combating racism and intersectionality, the notion again from the Afro-American migration and activist Kimberly Crenshaw from 1989. So we have the last years a more multi-directional approach, self-reflexive and anthropological pedagogy, capability approach and empowerment in education, as it was introduced by Dr. Madoubuko. Racismus pedagogic, as I said, from Professor Mecher and Professor Yiannis. Anti-racist pedagogic, so working with structures, policies, and also learning, training of teachers of undoing racial inequality, and with the ultimate goal of combating discrimination and exclusion. Before going to the part with the refugee students, no, with the refugee pupils and minors, I think it's also relevant to see, and this is perhaps a checklist, maybe we can also do that on one of our conference and workshop, in other working packages. This is on the notion of racism, critical pedagogic, a checklist, let's say, which has been, carved by many, as I said, migration and social researchers like Professor Yiannis and Professor Mecheril. So this is a checklist which I think also applies to, educational structures and schools. Is the critique of racism part of the institutional self-image? Is the critique of racism understood as a permanent cross-sectional task affecting all levels and persons? Which is the official policy of the institution on the subject of racism and the critique of racism? Are there time and financial capacities made available? Does the topic play a role in staffing? Some of the notions that I think Professor Barberis mentioned, and colonizing education and European values and schooling. What are the structural barriers and limits of a racism critical self-questioning, and how can they be dealt with? Is there a transfer of knowledge about racism on a legal, symbolic, political, and social level? And schools and educational structures as a creation of safe spaces. This is a thing we have learned a lot from social movements, but also from empowerment educators and people working with, as I said, with racism criticism and anti-racist education. And going to the last part with integrating refugee with inclusion via education, integrating refugees in German society. This is roughly the huge categories that the German educational system, with all its difficulties and problems, and with the federal state, which sometimes makes things even more complicated or difficult to administer. These are some of the the huge categories. Programs for refugee participation, language learning. This is also huge. Not also for education, but later for the integration, the labor market. And there I also saw some relevancies and commonalities with the Italian case, which I'm eager to discuss with you, and how important is it, but also how weak is also the training of German educators on German as a second foreign language, or trained to teach another language as English, and so on. The focus is always on this shifting sense of identity on refugees and integrating refugees in German society. We have, as Professor Roussakis also mentioned, we have also welcome submersion preparation, international introduction classes, second language instruction, which is a huge topic and a lot of problems on the practicalities of it. Multiculturally, ways on working with multiculturality as everyday life, and what is it in theory and what is it in practice, in practice, and acknowledging again cultural differences or drawing stereotypes. So the huge, again, just to sum it up, the huge sort of focus on education with refugees, on trying to not only talk about, as I said, intercultural education, but working on prejudices, stereotypes, discriminations, and otherly combating notions of structural and institutional racism. I think this is really important. So we can also build some transnational and European networks going on that direction also to our project. The appointment and training of teachers is also a huge topic, and the notion of tracking, as Professor Roussakis mentioned. I have also listed some problems and challenges. For example, that the strongly stratified German school system with its early selection makes it very difficult for refugee children arriving around the start of secondary school between age 10 and 14 to pursue an academic track which prepares for higher education. And however, second language difficulties often impede refugee children from finding an apprenticeship. Also, families often have difficulty to familiarize with the complexities of the vocational sector in Germany, according to Niemeyer. And an obvious problem is the potential competition of refugee students with native-born students for apprenticeship places. So in the labor market, we still have this, distinction of us and them. The natives, the white German natives against the foreigners, the refugees. And sorry to picture it like that, but this is the reality as far as I can interpret it. So the thriving German economy in need of labor has brought more openness in considering also young people, but with still language difficulties and lower formal qualifications. Of course, there are mostly professions requiring hard work and working conditions combined with comparatively low wages like construction work, bakers, and hairdressers. So nevertheless, I'm closing it down with a conclusion, and pardon me if I've exceeded the time. The Ministry of Culture and several individual schools are working on school reforms, new curricula, and teaching methods for either principal or other pragmatic reasons. Still, a general and systematic implementation of intercultural principles and equal opportunities is far from being realized. So even if migration issues are considered, the dualism between them and us still seems to dominate the process. Many social researchers and critical educators, as Professor Yiannis, would plead for integration policies that not only focus on the individual migrant, but put high emphasis on the institutions of the majority society and the support of individual figures in their intercultural competence. So consequently, apart from implementing, and I'm closing, apart from implementing social equal opportunities, there is a need for better and compulsory intercultural teacher training and supportive supervision, criteria for school quality, monitoring and evaluation processes with practical consequences for schools and individual educators. And last but not least, the need, and I think this was also mentioned, we can discuss it now in the last round, was also mentioned from the Italian and Greek case, the need for inclusive, participatory, democratic education, combating now notions of structural racism, institutional racism, discrimination and stereotypes, within the schooling system, within our communities of practice, within the same teachers that they teach and try to promote, European ways of life or European values. So we are talking, as I said, not only about or trying to act not only on intercultural education, but critical to racism and anti-racist education. Yeah, that was it from my side. Thank you very much, and pardon again for exceeding the time, Stavros and everyone. I hope that I listed the conclusions at the end. Maybe we can also talk about it because I saw a lot of common grounds with the Italian and Greek case. So yeah, thank you very much.
We thank you. That was very thorough and insightful indeed. And thank you very much, Christos, for presenting the German point of view on the integration between the immigrant and refugee students and the German educational system. And of course, you mentioned the problems also that arise during this process of the integration. By saying that, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Barberis to proceed, as the invitation says and the program says, to the conversation and the closure of the LTTA. Mr. Barberis.
Yes. Yeah. So I would just open the floor to any comment of question from each other. I think that we are in a number which everyone can just open the microphone. Otherwise, there's the function of raising the hand. But I think that
Vittorio has already. I'm going to give you the rights. Excuse me, Eduardo.
Okay.
You have the rights now, and you can give the floor.
Okay. Yes, Vittorio. Okay. Please, Vittorio, if you have a question, you can start, or a comment, you can start.
Yes, thank you for the possibility of having this overview on different practice in Europe. I currently work as a teacher in secondary education in Italy, and I've been working for quite a long time with Eduardo and other colleagues in the university. So it's a good position to see the distance that I think that still exists between the institutional and universitary discourse about education and what happens on the ground. And I think that one of the main focus of this project that is emerging from this preliminary assessment is the necessity of building links between these two aspects that are crucial for the success of educational integration of migrants and refugees. I appreciate especially the point of the last presentation, because I think that especially in Italy, the institutional environment of the secondary school, structural racism, and in general all the problems that come with intersectional power imbalance, they are completely forgotten. I mean, so I think one of the more interesting points, it's a question that I would like to raise to you, is how can we foster, how can we promote more reflexivity in the action of teachers and school workers in general? Because I think that more than stating principles and setting up legal frames, what we really need in practice is to foster more reflexivity and self-understanding of what is going on in the educational practice. I think that from my professional point of view is very crucial, because education is also a process that starts from the relationship between the teacher and the student in the group that is built up, and that is very, very crucial point. And the last thing I would ask, which is the role of NGOs and in general what we call in Italy the third sector, that in the majority of cases is taking a very important role also in the intercultural mediation and in the building of the social discourse about migration, especially in very polarized environment as we have in Italy, in Greece, and also in Germany about migration. The third sector, the social workers, they always have to take the part, of the good ones. They always have to say good things about migration, but also in that position, I think they lack and they risk to lack enough reflexivity, enough understanding of the real power relationships that lie behind education. So in some way, also, I would like to understand which is the role of the third sector, of the NGOs in our research, and if they have a specific task or specific space in our work plan.
Thank you, Vittorio. Any other questions? Otherwise, we can also go with a round of table from the speaker just to react to Vittorio's suggestions and hints.
I would like to pinpoint something, but you would like to answer the Vittorio's question and afterwards to pinpoint it, or whatever.
Nikos raised his hand, so please, Nikos.
Thank you, Eduardo. Some comments and thoughts regarding the Vittorio's speech. I agree totally, and I think that we have similar problems or similar issues in Greece. And I think that we have to problematize the European South context, and especially in the way of managing a refugee crisis from the EU, and how the European South became an entrance, a reception of refugee flows. So the NGOs also in Greece have the main role to manage these issues, and I think that the similar situation reflects in the educational practices. Many NGOs intervene to camps and try to have non-formal educational practices to intervene to the education of refugee children. And I think that this is a main issue for the European South, and maybe in the next steps we have to problematize much more about that regarding the residual social policy which is formulated from the European South, from the European welfare states to the South.
Thank you, Nikos. In waiting from others to raise their hand, I would add something. Well, obviously, as for the practice and guidance of teachers, that one of the constants of the project, we will have some multipliers events that are focused on this issue, and we for sure had to consider how to reach at best teachers, not just to talk to them, so to say, but to impact. And probably that's an issue I would start to put on the table. Also having the voices of refugee children heard, because the problem is that they are mostly voiceless. And that's also a point that we may raise about NGOs, in which we have, I think this applies to all the contexts, to Germany, to Italy, and to Greece. We have a lot of advocacy, but advocacy is a double-sided issue, because in a way it represents the voice, but is not the voice. So it's a kind of issue that may have some pros but also some cons, and that we may be conscious of. And just to have a few words on NGOs in the Italian case, I see two issues to be explored or put on the table. First, there's not so much involvement with the refugee minors, because it's such a separate system and in which it's difficult to enter, that the NGOs that usually work with migrants have a difficult task in collaborating, especially with some types of reception centers, the one that are more directly managed by the Ministry of Interior. And the other side is that there's this ambivalent role of the part of the third sector, in the sense that part of the third sector is involved as a provider of services for the public reception system. So they are paid by the state, basically. And this means that their advocacy role is compressed, because they cannot raise their voice against the people that is paying them. And there are a lot of debate within the social economy, so to say, because it's not just first sector, but it's social economy, wondering to which point they had to collaborate and to which point they have to drop out and not support the system. In Italy, we had it with the changes made in the reception system by the right-wing government and by Salvini when he was a minister. and many decided to drop out, others not, because in a way they are now dependent on the resources coming from the state. And that's a complex balance to achieve. So I think we have to focus on the ambivalences, and I can see there's one being contracted out on the one hand, and the other is the ambivalence between voice and advocacy. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Chris, okay. I don't know if you raised the hand or
no, I just
because...
applauded. I just don't want to do this
okay.
signal. So,
so then Stavros,
so
yes, Stavros raised his hand. Okay.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to, would like to pinpoint one or two points that I think that are of great importance, and they should be highlighted. First of all, I believe that the existing framework focuses on specific policies regarding immigrant and refugee pupils, and there's a lack, I believe there's a lack, and that's what I figured out, that there's a lack of policies regarding educational integration and their social inclusion, I mean pupils inclusion. The second one I would like to say is that the research findings so that both the knowledge and skills of the trainers respectively, I believe in every country presented, and the current institutional framework, and by saying framework I mean national, hyper-national, European, are of great need of specialization of new policies that must be established and would be friendly to immigrant and refugee students, so as the decision-making centers achieve vigilance on these issues. And the last one is that the existing framework I mentioned earlier does not cover special situations, and Mr. Barberis said that. He mentioned in his presentation of people that, of pupils that are facing problems like non-Italian, and I believe in Germany is the same, or in Greece is the same, people that do not speak the language that they live in, disabled minors, or in post-traumatic stress conditions that Mr. Barberis mentioned. So I believe that those are 3 or 4 major points that I would like to pinpoint, and this is what I want to say.
Thank you, Stavros. Other comments? Yiannis?
Thank you, Eduardo. I really thank you all for your presentations. I mean, they were really illuminating, and having drafted out the guidelines for the desk review, I see that each partner has accommodated the research to the specificities of the vocabulary of the context that they live in. So on the part of Eduardo, we've seen this focus on unaccompanied minors, which is really crucial for the education of refugee children. It is also intertwining education with the social welfare and protection system, which multiplies the factors that have to be taken into consideration when we are talking about the educational integration of children in the system. And on the part of Chris, I've seen also this critical migration pedagogy approach, which is also very relevant towards the continuity of education. So I really thank you. And of course, Nikos laid out very thoroughly the context of Greece and all the problems that we have here on the institutional, educational, and ground level for including refugee children, refugee minors in the system. What is what is really interesting is that as I think it was I'm sorry, what was lacking was this reflexivity that Vittorio mentioned, and what we need to address in this project is to reflect on how these institutional barriers could become could be overcome, and come up with ways that take into consideration the difficulties, but can also circumvent the system towards new approaches. I think that we have a long way to go, and every turn is revealing of new factors and situations that have to be taken into consideration. And it is really important that we have three countries with three different contexts. For example, as Nikos mentioned, Greece had a history of receiving immigrants from the Balkan countries, or from the former socialist bloc in the 90s. But when it confronted the crisis of 2015 and 2016, it was a completely different game. It was a completely different discourse that had to be developed in order to respond to the needs of these people and the educational situation. The approach of the 90s was one of the one that Chris mentioned in the beginnings of the German case, of people that would come into Greece, probably stay a few years, work, and then return home, which was not the situation for most of the people who actually lived in Greece, that prospered in Greece, and now they're second-generation immigrants. During the refugee crisis, there was also a similar mentality that these people are going to come through Greece and go to Italy or to Germany or to Switzerland, and what we have to do is just cater for their needs in the brief period that they will stay in Greece. But as we've seen, any time period in these children's lives is important. And in order to, they have to go through the system. They have to go through the asylum processes. They have to go through the welfare protection system. So the Greek politics, or the Greek policy towards refugee children, at first I think was an excuse of not taking very good care of them, and the continuity of the continuity that we are seeking to establish says that we provide a full-fledged education provision right from the start to the end point, and this is really important. And I think that this project serves it really well by, in this first intellectual output, by pinpointing the problems and the factors in the institutional level, in the school level, in the system level, in the NGO level, in the non-state sector that have to deal with these problems. So really, thank you for being so illuminating in your presentations and giving me further prospect in this project.
Thank you, Yiannis. I would say that for the institutional side, perhaps for the more scientific conceptualization and framing, we may use the concept of civic stratification as elaborated by Lydia Morris, and to work it out also for our practical side in two directions. One is to trying to understand which categories are used to classify different typologies of refugee minors, and what kind of rights are associated to their position. Unaccompanied minors, unaccompanied minors granted asylum, unaccompanied minors that do not ask for asylum, unaccompanied minors that ask for asylum but are not granted asylum, and we are already with 3 categories, just with unaccompanied minors. And then there are the accompanied refugee minors, asylum seekers, etc. So there are, and which rights are associated, formally are associated to them. And then we have also to check on the field if and how this difference turn out into inequality in access to education and provision. And on the one hand, which is harder, to suggest that some categories are not helpful or are jeopardizing life opportunities. And on the other hand, how to help schools and teachers to work out things as is, that is in the, because they, from the single school, they cannot change the legal framework, but what can they do if they are reflexive enough in working out a good inclusive education, given the civic stratification in which pupils are, and that probably schools are not always so aware about. They just know that there's this young guy that comes from a reception center, but I'm quite sure that there are no clear understanding of their legal condition and what this means for the life opportunity of the child, and also because it's very complex to follow up all the legal changes and framings, and from the point of view of the school. Okay, other comments and questions?
If I may add one sentence, I believe it is really good that we are coming from different disciplines in this project. And what I see is that if we focus exclusively on the educational issue, we are missing the bigger picture, which is probably most relevant. So introducing concepts like social stratification actually allows us to review policies and practices within a larger framework, which is really helpful when we are trying to introduce continuity, which is not only educational, but it depends on other factors as well. Age factors, social factors, family factors, institutional, state, non-state, and etc.
Okay. Other comments? Just put a link in the chat just to add to the literature list. Okay. Is there any other comments? Yes, Chris.
Yes, just a complementary one, because I think, but this is also a broader issue that we can also discuss, perhaps on in the continuation of the program on working packets, but I think maybe I'm being too theoretical here because perhaps I bombarded in the beginning with a huge theoretical or a historical, background of Germany as Einwanderungsland, but I thought it had a meaning and a purpose. And I think we should all, because I saw a lot of common references with the Italian case, especially in the language issue, and how does this defines how refugees or even people with migration background will go, so to say, upper in the society, or how they will be integrated in the labor markets. So the labor market in Germany, and I'm experiencing it as well as a researcher, non-German researcher. It's stratified, and we also see not a lot of persons of migration background, but also refugees. They don't get the opportunities to go further, to study in the university or to the vocational system. There's also the issue of a lot of German educators, and I'm not accusing them, just stating the problem that they don't get sufficient training. Even if you think that that's impossible for Germany, still there are huge issues on the secondary education from colleagues and friends that I have, but also in the university. There are still a lot of old schemes and paradigms, like older notions of intercultural education or even assimilation, and all this. So what I'm trying to say is that also, not only in Germany, the European conference, we have to tradition. We should also, and that's why I'm forming in the framework of a question, that to also re-examine and see which economical and socio-political conditions under which, socio-economical and political conditions where educational policies towards migration and refugees developed. Because, the discourse constructs, policies and strategies, or also a way of thinking about migration or refugees. Still a lot of people, also what I'm experiencing in Germany, a lot of colleagues or other people who are not their own social or cultural sciences, but they're not working on migration, whenever they hear about, I don't know, issues of structural or institutional racism, or about the difficulties of refugee children or minors, there's still a lot of lack of training. That's what I want to say, and this sort of synesthesis, like this, I don't know how to pardon here for the language, have the trilingual effect of German, English, Greek, or whatever.
Yeah,
but,
that's empathy, I think.
Empathy, bravo, exactly, empathy, which is different in the Latin context. Thank you, Yiannis. But that empathy is not to be sold on the App Store. This is a dynamic procedure, collaborative aspects within educators, within social policy planners, researchers, acclaimed social researchers that we have here in this table. So how do we cultivate this? So I'm just always thinking about the socioeconomical conditions. That's why I started with the 70s background of Germany and Gastarbeiter, which is also the topic of my research. So I'm maybe a lot on that. So maybe it's a PhD crisis thing, but but how this notion of towards migration or Ausländer is still kept on the society, and it's still transmitted in parts of the educational system. Or the so-called Hilfe syndrome, that I think it goes in Italy or in Netherlands or in other countries, that we, the wealthy Northern Europeans, the white Northern Europeans, who have to help those, this distinction of us and them. But again, so my commentary question was on the socio-political and economical conditions and how do they influence the educational policies. Of course, you mentioned it, but maybe perhaps on the second, I don't know in which context or workshop perhaps could we do on this thematic.
In my presentation, I shortly put it as the colonizing education.
Exactly.
And that perhaps it's a terminology a bit too American, I don't know, but and also because we have countries that did not reflect that much on their colonial past, like Germany or Italy, or I don't know if Greece had a colonial past as other countries.
This is a huge discussion.
Only in the ancient times.
Yeah, okay. but it's a point about because even though we have educational systems that are quite differentiated, as was shown in the first in the first slide, I think that we have countries comparable in the sense of going toward a sort of assimilationism or conservative multiculturalism, as some sociologists of education put it, that is, the other is accepted, but in a lower position, to say, and if doesn't show up too much. And so we have countries that probably have similar conservative multiculturalism tendency in education. And so it may be a common starting point also for the reflexivity in schools and for discussing with teachers on how to go over this and to consider other perspective in understanding minorities and minority pupils. Okay. Other comment or questions?
I think many of these questions are going to be addressed also in the needs analysis and assessment. Probably many of the questions that arise from the state-of-the-art review actually are talking about needs and things that haven't been taken care of, or things that should be considered as the needs of the migrant minors. So I see this connection between the two first intellectual outputs of our project, and I think that we're going to come up with much more reflective positions around all these issues during the next months.
Yep. Okay. Any last comment? Because we are really sharp in time and we did a very good job. And so if there are no other questions, I think we can close the session. Thank you to all the people that attended. And so we had the session has been recorded, so we will have, I think, a summary of our points, and useful, as Yiannis mentioned, for the following step. I think that now we have the second package, as was mentioned before, and the next event, Stavros, tell me if I'm wrong, is the multiplier event.
Yes,
that we need to have in autumn or fall. We don't know which version.
The next one is the multiplier event, the first multiplier event. It will take place, as you said, the autumn. We're going to define the date, and that's it for today. First LTTA.
So thank you on my part, and to all the participants, and so see you soon for the consortium group, probably earlier, and for the wider group we will communicate again about future events. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Really, Stavros and Eduardo, thank you very much for organizing this. It was really, really good.
Thank you to Stavros, that is really keeping the project glued together.
Yes, yes.
For being the glue. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Big up.
Okay, bye-bye then. Well done, Stavros. Bravo.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a
Thank
nice
you, all
day.
of you.
Stavros.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.